If there was ever a night when the fault lines of Hollywood shimmered beneath the polished marble floors of a billionaire's mansion, it was the night Kim Kardashian deleted a photo, an act so small it should have slipped unnoticed into the background noise of social media, but instead cracked open a spectacle that the city would whisper about long after the lights of the party dimmed. Nobody knew that a single tap, performed somewhere between a champagne toast and a whispered joke, would ignite a storm of speculation intense enough to shake the confidence of people who built their careers on controlling the narrative. But that night carried a strange electricity even before the first limousine glided past the gates. It didn't just feel like a party, it felt like a stage set for something to unravel. And it did, for Meghan Markle, or at least the fictionalized version of her in this exaggerated world. The walk up the driveway may as well have been a slow-motion entrance in a blockbuster film. Chrome lights glimmered off mirrored surfaces, the air hummed with conversations too rich for ordinary ears, and the low bass from the hidden outdoor speakers throbbed like a heartbeat. She stepped onto the marble with the kind of certainty reserved for people who believe destiny will rearrange itself to give them the spotlight. Harry followed a few steps behind, trying to look comfortable in a space that felt like it had been curated by an algorithm that studied glamour, wealth, and influence until it could recreate perfection. They had been in Hollywood circles long enough to know that an invitation to Kris Jenner's 70th birthday party, fictionally exaggerated here into a surreal mega event, meant access, opportunity, and an unspoken stamp of belonging. Except in this universe, what neither of them realized was that the night would not unfold like an ascent, but like a test. The mansion itself felt alive, glowing with warm golden accents and a Bond-inspired theatricality that made every guest appear as though they'd stepped out of a high-gloss magazine spread. Kim Kardashian was already holding court by the time the Sussexes slipped inside, draped in a shimmering dress that flashed silvery light with each movement. People gravitated toward her magnetic presence with the instinct of moths chasing a flame. Meghan drifted slightly to the side, adjusting herself into a pose she'd practiced 100 times in front of cameras. Harry looked at her, waiting for a cue, but she remained focused on the room. Her eyes scanned for recognition, for a spark, for someone who might glance back with warmth. And when they did, it wasn't with the familiarity she'd anticipated, but with polite, distant curiosity. Hollywood, even in fiction, can be a strange place. One moment you're embraced, the next you're an accessory to the scene, like decor arranged for effect but not central to the story. And as Meghan watched the flowing energy of the party, she sensed it almost immediately. There was no gentle shift to make room for her in conversations, no eager hands reaching to pull her into the center. It wasn't coldness. It wasn't hostility. It was simply disinterest, a quiet kind of dismissal wrapped in politeness. The room continued moving, laughing, mingling, swirling around her as if she were a pillar someone had designed around, but not quite incorporated. Harry leaned slightly toward her and whispered something only she could hear. But even that moment slipped away when a photographer passed, and Meghan instinctively angled herself in case a candid shot might capture her presence. They hadn't even been in the room long enough for the ice in their champagne glasses to melt when Kim approached, smiling, bubbly, gracious, pulling Meghan into a short, friendly conversation that felt more obligatory than enthusiastic. Still, it was a chance. For a fleeting moment, they stood together and someone snapped a photo. Meghan felt the familiar rush of opportunity. The photo might have been just one frame in a sea of content for Kim, but for Meghan, it was symbolic. Proof that she existed in the orbit she wanted. The moment passed quickly. Kim swept away into another conversation, and Meghan stood there, replaying her own posture, her own expression, imagining how it might have appeared on Kim's feed. She wondered if the lighting had been flattering, if she'd angled her chin correctly, if she'd appeared elegant next to one of the most photographed women in the world. She touched her hair, suddenly unsure whether it had been sitting properly on her shoulder. She tried to shake the insecurity. She tried to brace herself with composure. But something in the back of her mind tugged, an unease that felt like a premonition. And then, somewhere across the room, someone gasped. A small gasp, the kind that normally wouldn't matter, but this one carried a weight only the very online would understand. A photo had just gone up on Kim's account, an image from the party, glossy and bright, capturing the glittering energy of the evening. Meghan felt her pulse quicken. She reached for her phone, hoping she was included, hoping that her moment had made it into the public narrative. But when she saw the post, her stomach twisted. Kim was there. The room was there. The glamour was there. Guests she recognized were there. But she wasn't. For a beat, she told herself it didn't matter. It was only one post. Maybe another was coming. Maybe she was saved for a carousel. Maybe the photo they took hadn't turned out. She forced herself to smile, to stay composed, to glide through the room with confidence. But then another whisper made its way across the party. Kim had posted another photo. And another. Dozens of guests. Influencers. Actors. Music stars. Athletes. People Meghan had never met. People who hadn't even exchanged a nod with Kim tonight. But still, somehow no picture of Meghan. Suspense thickened, and not even the ambient music could disguise the palpable shift in energy. Meghan tried to ignore it, but every few seconds she glanced at her phone, waiting for her moment to appear. And then finally there it was. A notification. Kim had tagged her in something. Meghan exhaled, relief flooding her chest. Maybe she'd overthought everything. Maybe all of this anxious energy had been nothing more than her mind indulging in insecurity. She tapped the notification. For a moment, the image loaded. It was the photo. The one she'd taken with Kim. A single frame capturing two women standing side by side, both smiling, both poised. Meghan felt warmth rise through her. She imagined how the internet would react, how this would signal her continued place in Hollywood's textured universe. For a fleeting second, it was perfect. And then, right in front of her, the image vanished. Gone. Deleted. The warming comfort in Meghan's chest collapsed into cold, quiet shock. She stared at the blank space where the photo had existed moments earlier, refreshing her screen as though the disappearance had been a glitch. But it wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a mistake. Kim had deleted the post. The fictional universe tightened around Meghan as though someone had dimmed her spotlight and cranked up the tension, turning the moment into a scene from a psychological drama. She could feel her heart beating in her fingertips, her palms, the hollow beneath her rib cage. She hadn't anticipated this. She hadn't prepared for it. And worst of all, it felt deliberate, purposeful, a message wrapped in silence. Harry noticed immediately. He saw her expression shift, subtly, quickly, but unmistakably, from practiced poise to something more fragile. He placed a gentle hand on her back and leaned close. She didn't respond. Her breath came shallow and uneven. He frowned, looked at her phone, and the tightening in his jaw told her he understood exactly what had happened. Around them, the fictional crowd continued its effortless dance of power and glamour, oblivious to the emotional earthquake unfolding at the center of the room. They remained immersed in conversations that sparkled like champagne bubbles, unaware that for Meghan, the walls were inching closer, forcing her into a space she had no idea how to navigate. She swallowed hard, telling herself she didn't care, telling herself it wasn't personal, but it was impossible not to care. The deletion was an erasure, not just of a photo, but of presence, of acceptance, of belonging. It stung with a precision she wasn't prepared for. She replayed the moment she'd posed next to Kim, remembering how she'd angled her shoulders, how she'd tucked her hair behind her ear, how she'd smiled with an expression she hoped would appear timeless. Now, that memory felt hollow, and that was when the whispers began. At first, they drifted like harmless background chatter, soft, speculative, harmless. But slowly they sharpened. Someone mentioned they'd overheard a conversation about protecting the brand. Someone else murmured about how the Kardashians operated like a corporation that filtered people through an invisible compatibility test. And somewhere deeper in the room, someone added, with the sharpness of a blade, that maybe the photo wasn't flattering enough for Kim's account. None of it was malicious. None of it was cruel. But in fiction, perception can be more powerful than fact, and Meghan felt her mind spinning into a storm of imagined scenarios, each more unsettling than the last. Had she said something wrong? Had she misread Kim's energy? Had her outfit clashed with the aesthetic? Had she inadvertently stepped into a moment that wasn't hers? She tried to shake the thoughts, but the whispers grew louder. Not in volume, but in impact. Every speculative comment felt like a stone thrown at her carefully constructed composure. She heard someone mention that perhaps the photo wasn't deleted at Kim's request at all.
Perhaps someone else had asked.
Someone who watched Meghan's image carefully. Someone who might have thought the lighting, or angle, or mood didn't suit the narrative they wanted to portray. It was fiction, of course. None of it real. But in this universe, the characters believed their own stories as fiercely as actors immersed in a role. As the tension reached its peak, Meghan felt heat rising beneath her skin, as though she'd stepped under a spotlight too bright to withstand. She clutched her phone more tightly, wishing she could peel back time, redo the pose, reframe the moment, reclaim the space she felt slipping between her fingers. And then came the twist. A rumor began swirling through the fictional party, like smoke curling between velvet curtains, whispered by one guest, caught by another, passed like a secret too irresistible to contain. The rumor said they weren't officially invited, that their names hadn't appeared on the master list, that their arrival had been met not with anticipation but with confusion. It wasn't true, of course, but in the fictional world, truth mattered far less than perception. Meghan felt her knees weaken. The rumor wasn't just a misunderstanding. It transformed everything. The walk into the mansion, the glances from guests, the lukewarm greetings, into a sequence of moments painted with embarrassment rather than elegance. It reframed the entire evening from a strategic appearance to a misstep. It burned through her confidence like wildfire, leaving her exposed in a room full of people who didn't seem to notice the emotional collapse unfolding inches away from them. Harry tried to guide her to a quieter corner, but Meghan barely registered his touch. Her gaze remained fixed on her phone, the blank space where the photo had been mocking her with its emptiness. She tried to conjure explanations, logical reasons, comforting narratives, but all she could think was that she had been erased. Not ignored, erased. As though the moment had never mattered. As though she had been a placeholder in a world that didn't see her as a permanent fixture. They left soon after. 10 minutes, maybe. Just long enough for rumors to shimmer, for whispers to take root, for the deletion to spread like a digital ghost across social media. When they stepped outside, the cool night air felt like a slap rather than a relief. Meghan inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself, but the ache in her chest refused to loosen. In the car, Harry watched her silently. He knew the script by now. He'd seen the way she held herself together even when her world tilted. But this was different. This wasn't external criticism or public scrutiny. This was a social fracture, a status shift, a feedback loop from a circle she once hoped to belong to. He told her it wasn't personal. She didn't believe him. When they returned home, the internet had already erupted. Screenshots of the deleted photo were spreading like wildfire. TikTok creators were analyzing the milliseconds between posting and deleting. Forums speculated about the angle, the lighting, the tension between the two women. Some insisted Kim had done it intentionally. Others claimed Meghan had requested it. Still others argued it was all part of a coordinated PR move. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was the story people chose to believe. And somewhere in that fictional universe, Kim posted again more party photos, more glamour, more guests. And still no Meghan. The silence was louder than any deletion. A new wave of whispers emerged, rippling through the digital world. Maybe the deletion wasn't about aesthetics. Maybe it was about brand protection. Maybe it was about distancing. Maybe it was Hollywood's quiet way of saying that Meghan's presence, at least in this fictional setting, wasn't the currency it once was. Meghan stared at her screen, watching the narrative slip beyond her control. She'd built her confidence on the belief that she could craft her own storyline, but tonight proved that sometimes the story is taken from you, reshaped, repurposed, and redistributed without your permission. And then came the final blow. Agents, publicists, brand strategists, all fictionalized in this universe, began murmuring the same sentiment, that Meghan, once considered a rising force in Hollywood, now carried a kind of narrative volatility that made people hesitant to engage. Not out of malice, out of caution, out of strategy, out of calculation. Meghan felt the weight of that realization settle deep in her bones. She had walked into the party believing her presence would affirm her relevance. Instead, she walked out feeling like she had been erased from a story she desperately wanted to star in. The deletion was not the ending. It was the beginning. And in this fictional universe, the suspense was far from over. The thing about reality shows is that they're never really about reality. They're about tension dressed as truth, conflict dressed as confession, and glamour painted over a fracture. But that night, the fractures weren't just visible. They were loud,
Alive. Hungry.
Kim could feel them. Everyone could. She wasn't used to being ignored, not by cameras, not by producers, and definitely not by the millions who normally treated her like a living push notification. But ever since the crew decided to pivot the storyline from Kim's big business rebrand to royal turmoil, the American chapter, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: second place. Behind Meghan. It was almost funny. Two women who had spent their entire lives being photographed from angles most humans didn't even know they had, now fighting silently over which one deserved the next wide shot. But the cameras weren't subtle anymore. They weren't even pretending. They hunted heat, hunted conflict, hunted the kind of emotional blood that made streaming numbers spike. And tonight, Meghan carried that fire like she'd been storing it in her lungs. She walked into the room with Harry 2 steps behind her. Not close enough to look united, not far enough to look free. The crew noticed. They always noticed. One of the producers mouthed, yes, so dramatically you'd think they had just landed an interview with Beyoncé. Meghan's smile was perfect, but sharp around the edges. She was exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that comes from holding together 2 different versions of yourself for too long. The dutiful wife, the American royal, the brand. Kim clocked it immediately. She didn't judge. She just recognized the look. The I will not cry because there is a lens somewhere look. But what annoyed her wasn't Meghan's presence. It was how the room reshaped itself around her. The director approached Meghan with the sort of reverence usually reserved for Oscar winners and billionaires. "We want to follow you more closely tonight," he whispered. "There's something really raw in your energy."
Raw.
The word Kim hated more than gluten. Raw was another way of saying, "You're cracked open, and we want to film inside the wound." Meghan nodded politely, but there was a flicker in her eyes, a warning or a surrender. Nobody could tell. Even Harry seemed unsure as he lingered behind her like a bodyguard who'd forgotten his job description. Kim turned toward her own crew, but half of them had already drifted toward Meghan, pulled like moths to a better subplot. That's when Kris walked in. Kris Jenner did not enter a room. She rearranged it.
People made space.
Conversations paused. Cameramen adjusted their posture like students caught slouching. She scanned the room like a battlefield strategist, cataloging alliances, weaknesses, opportunities. She saw Meghan. She saw Kim. She saw the divide forming like wet paint drying into 2 different shades. And then she spotted the producers, the ones who were suddenly acting like Meghan was the new gravitational center of the universe. Kris smiled her pure smile, warm, controlled, and laced with enough threat to make a parking meter apologize for issuing a ticket. "Oh, wonderful," she said, gliding toward them. "So, happy we're capturing a balanced narrative tonight." Balanced. Another warning. But the producers, drunk on potential Emmy clips, didn't catch the undertone. They floated toward Meghan again. Kim felt her jaw tighten. It wasn't jealousy. Not really. Kim had built an empire by turning criticism into content. She liked competition as long as it was fair. But this felt like she'd been written out of her own episode. And when Kim snapped her head around, she saw Meghan watching her. Not maliciously, not smugly. Something else. Something tired. Something that whispered, "If you want the spotlight, take it." I'm barely holding on to it myself. But Kim hesitated. And in reality TV, hesitation is a death sentence. That was when the first spark hit the ground. A producer, young, overeager, One of those I can fix every scene with a confessional types suggested they shoot a dynamic moment between Kim and Meghan. Kris' eyes widened a fraction. Kim inhaled sharply. Meghan froze. And Harry, who until now had been pretending the lighting fixtures were fascinating, finally spoke. "No," he said. Quiet but not weak. The room stopped. Kim blinked. Meghan blushed, surprised. The producer swallowed. Harry stepped forward, not toward Meghan, not toward Kim, but toward the cameras themselves, as if the real confrontation was between him and the machine that had been swallowing all of them for years. "You're not going to stage this," Harry said. "Not today." But the director smiled the way people do when they see a storyline breaking open like fruit. "Oh, we're not staging anything," he said. "We're just capturing." And that was when the second spark hit. Because Meghan whispered, too quietly for the producer, but not quietly enough for Kim. They always say that, right before everything burns. Kim didn't know if she meant the cameras, or the marriage, or the room itself.
But the air changed.
And everyone felt it.
A shift.
A tightening. A twist of tension that wrapped itself around the walls like a fuse. And Kim, for the first time that night, realized something. She wasn't the center of the episode. She wasn't even the rival. She was a witness. And something between Meghan and Harry, something long hidden, long managed, long spun into PR-friendly fragments, was about to explode. The thing about a moment before disaster is that it doesn't look like disaster. It looks like a pause, a breath held too long, a silence that waits for someone, anyone, to ruin it. And that's exactly what this room had become, a silence dressed in sequins. Harry didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Just by speaking at all, he had cut the room in half. Half camera, half human. Meghan stared at him as if he'd just pushed open a door she'd been leaning against for years. She looked startled, and maybe a little afraid. Not of him, but of what the cameras would turn his words into. Kim understood that fear instantly. She had lived her whole life knowing a single sentence could become a season arc. Kris saw it too. Her eyes sharpened, calculating narrative trajectories like a stockbroker watching the market crash and thinking, how do I turn this into a comeback? The young producer, the one who'd suggested the dynamic moment, took a step back. His headset crackled. Someone in the control room whispered something urgent, but he didn't answer. He couldn't take his eyes off Harry. No one gave Harry permission to speak. But he had the floor now. "You're not going to twist this into some fake storyline," Harry said, quieter now but more dangerous for it. "You've been circling us for weeks, pushing, prodding, acting like tension is entertainment." The director tilted his head, studying Harry the way a scientist studies a rare animal. "Tension is entertainment," he said softly, almost affectionately. "And whether you realize it or not, you signed up for this." Meghan flinched.
Kim saw it.
Kris saw it. Every camera in the room locked in on it. Harry took another step forward. His jaw twitched just once. "We didn't sign up for you to manipulate us." The director didn't blink. "Everyone manipulates," he said. "Us, you, the audience. Meghan knows this more than anyone." Meghan's spine straightened. Her face shifted, still beautiful, still poised, but colder, older, like someone peeling off the last layer of patience. "Don't talk about me like I'm a plot device," she said. "Oh, Meghan," the director said, with the kind of smile that cameras love. "You are the plot device."
Kim winced. Even she wouldn't have said something like that. The room split open then.
Not physically, but emotionally. A tear right through the center of the evening. Meghan stepped forward so fast Harry reached out instinctively, as if he thought she might fall. But she didn't fall. She stood tall, chin up, shoulders back, the kind of posture people mistake for confidence but is actually survival. "You don't get to define me," Meghan said. "Of course I do," the director replied. "That's what editing is for." The silence that followed didn't feel like a pause anymore. It felt like impact. Kim's heart hammered. She suddenly wasn't thinking about screen time or trending clips. She was thinking about how many times she herself had been carved into whatever shape a producer needed. She'd just never said it out loud. Kris took a step closer to Kim, her hand brushing her arm. Protective, calculated, maternal, managerial, everything at once. Harry exhaled, shaking his head, muttering something under his breath that sounded like, "This is exactly why we left." And then Meghan, who had been holding herself together by sheer force of will, finally cracked. Not visibly, not dramatically, but internally, the exact way a glass breaks when the temperature changes too fast. "You want a story?" she said, stepping toward the main camera, her voice trembling but rising. "Here's your story.
You chase people until they snap. You push them until they fight.
You build us up so you can watch us fall. You don't film reality. You create it," Kim whispered, before she could stop herself. Everyone looked at her. Kim blinked. The words felt like something pulled out of her. Not spoken, but confessed. The director's eyes lit up like someone had just handed him a season finale. "Oh, this is brilliant," he said. Finally, honesty. Raw, emotional, vulnerable. "Stop calling it raw." Kim snapped. Even Meghan turned, surprised. Kris' hand tightened around Kim's arm, warning or steadying. Maybe both. The director opened his mouth again, but Kris stepped forward before he could speak. "We're done for tonight," Kris said, voice smooth as stone. "Shut the cameras off." Her tone didn't rise. It didn't need to, but the crew didn't move. Because in this world, the only thing stronger than a command from Kris Jenner was the scent of a perfect meltdown scene. The director gave a tiny nod to the cameraman. "Keep rolling."
Kim saw it.
Meghan saw it. Kris absolutely saw it. Harry let out a humorless laugh. Of course you're still filming." Meghan's hands curled at her sides, not in anger, but in something worse. Resignation. "That's enough," she whispered to Harry. "Let's just go." And for a moment, just one, it looked like they would simply walk out. The scene would end. The cameras would shut down. The story would die. But then the door opened. A new figure stepped in, and the entire room froze. Because it wasn't another producer. It wasn't a crew member. It wasn't a stylist or assistant. It was someone who should not have been there. Someone who made the director's expression flicker. Fear, excitement, victory, all at once. Kim inhaled sharply. Meghan tensed. Harry's face drained of color. The newcomer smiled, slow and deliberate. "Well," they said, "looks like I walked in at the perfect time." And just like that, the night broke open. The door didn't just open. It punctured the scene. The newcomer stepped in the way people step onto a stage, aware of the audience, aware of the lighting, aware that every eye in the room was locked on them before they even spoke.
Tall, calm, too calm.
Their presence rolled across the room like a cold draft, sweeping under conversations, slipping between breaths, rearranging the mood with a single step. Kim's mouth dropped open. She didn't even bother hiding it. Kris's spine straightened like a drawn bow. Harry stiffened. Meghan's expression went blank, the kind of blank that isn't emptiness, but protection. The director, meanwhile, looked like he'd been given a Michelin star meal after a week of vending machine snacks. "You," he whispered, delighted. "Oh, this is perfect." The newcomer smiled, a slow, knowing smile reserved for people who understand exactly how much power they hold simply by showing up. "Hope I'm not interrupting," they said. They absolutely were. That was the point. They walked farther into the room, not hesitating, not asking permission, not even glancing at the cameras, which made the cameras tilt toward them like sunflowers chasing light. This person wasn't supposed to be in this episode. Not tonight. Not unannounced. Which meant only one thing. They wanted something. And they knew the cameras would give it to them. Meghan shifted slightly, as if instinct warned her to step back. Harry's hand hovered near hers, not touching, not guiding, just there. A silent question. Kim felt the tension coil in her stomach. She nudged Kris gently, a whisper slipping out. "Why are they here?" Kris didn't answer. Her jaw clenched, subtle, but enough. The newcomer finally focused on Meghan and Harry. "I heard there was tension," they said. "Thought I'd see for myself." Meghan's jaw tightened. "This isn't your scene." "Oh, Meghan." The newcomer said sweetly. Everything is my scene. Harry's eyes flashed, the first real anger he showed all night. You don't get to waltz in here and… Harry, Meghan whispered, placing a hand lightly on his arm, not to stop him, but to anchor him. The director stepped closer, eyes gleaming. Actually, he said, this timing is incredible. Unplanned. Authentic. Raw. Kim groaned. If you say raw one more time, I swear I'm leaving. Kris tugged her back subtly, but Kim's muttering continued. No one wants raw. Raw is bad chicken. Raw is lawsuits. Raw is… But no one listened. All eyes were still on the newcomer. And the newcomer loved it. You too, they said, gesturing at Meghan and Harry, have been avoiding me. Meghan let out a small laugh, but it wasn't humor. It was disbelief. Avoiding you, she said. No. Just trying to protect our sanity. Oh, come on, the newcomer replied, rolling their eyes. Don't act like I'm the villain here. The room went still. Kim's head snapped toward Meghan. Harry's shoulders tensed. The director literally leaned forward, because Meghan's expression changed. Slightly. Barely. But enough. Funny, she said softly. You always say that right before you do something awful. A murmur went through the crew. The cameras zoomed in. The air thickened. The newcomer blinked, slowly, calculatingly, before answering. Well, if we're talking about awful things, should we? Meghan didn't respond. Not with words. But her eyes did. They flared, with warning, with exhaustion, with something dangerously close to a dare. The director sensed an explosion coming. He stepped back, letting the scene play out like a predator crouching to watch prey collide. The newcomer took a step closer to Meghan and Harry, lowering their voice, but not enough that the mics couldn't catch it. I think it's time, they said, that everyone heard the truth. Kim's heart slammed. So did Kris's. What truth? Harry asked sharply. The newcomer glanced at the cameras, finally acknowledging them. Oh, don't worry, they said. I'll let the whole world hear it. Meghan took a step forward, just one, but it was enough to shift the gravity in the room. You wouldn't, she said. The newcomer smiled, eyes glittering. Oh, Meghan, you always underestimate me. And then, before anyone could stop them, before Harry could pull Meghan away, before Kris could shut down the scene, before Kim could even breathe, the newcomer turned toward the main camera, lifted their chin, and spoke. The real reason they've been falling apart is, the lights flickered, the sound cut, the camera feeds froze. Then, darkness. A blackout. Kim screamed. Someone tripped over a lighting rig. The director shouted for backup power. Producers scrambled. Crew panicked. And in the pitch-black chaos, Meghan's voice whispered, Harry, where are you? But the room was too dark to see who answered.